Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Stories, Sovereignty, and Imagining Forward. This is a part of our virtual International Festival of Arts and Ideas. My name is Elizabeth Nearing. I'm the curator of Ideas Programming. And this is Jason. Oh, Jason, I think you're muted. Yes. My name is Elizabeth Nearing. I'm the curator of Ideas
I'm Jason
Programming.
Mancini, Connecticut Humanities.
And this is Jason. Oh, Jason, I think you're muted. Yes. My name is Elizabeth Nearing. I'm the curator of Ideas
Jason
Programming.
Mancini.
Oh, I don't know what's happening. Hello, everyone. We're live. The International Festival of Arts and Ideas is created and produced on the traditional lands of the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Schaghticoke, Golden Hill Paugussett, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and the land we call home, Connecticut. We hope that from wherever you are, you take a moment to acknowledge and honor the Native people whose lands you are on and the history of the place you are in. You can find out more about Native land near you in a link that we're going to pop into the comment section for everyone, whether you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. And the International Festival of Arts and Ideas stands with Black Lives Matter and with countless citizens in our own city and across the country who are exercising their right to protest the systemic racism at the root of police violence. The festival stands in solidarity with Black and Brown communities who are targeted and abused by unjust systems of oppression. And this year, our Ideas Programming has been created in collaboration with an abundance of thought partners, including our neighbors here in New Haven. We're working with amazing sponsors, including the Whitney Center, media support from Connecticut Public, and the amazing Connecticut Humanities, which Jason is joining us. And let's see if we've got sound figured out. Support from Connecticut Public. So we've got a technical difficulty. So Jason is joining us from Connecticut Humanities, an amazing collaborator that we've been working with throughout while planning this festival. And I wonder, Jason, if you mute your computer, maybe it won't pick up the sound. Let's see if we can try that. Jason, if you mute your computer. Oh no, I think that we just are having a technical difficulty today. So thank you everybody for being patient with us. I do want to say as we go through the event today, we can include your comments and your thoughts as we go through. So please comment questions and we'll incorporate them to the best of our ability. Let's see. All right, Jason, we're going to give it one more go. Maybe the third time is the charm. Questions, and we'll incorporate them to the best of our ability. Let's see. All right, Jason, we're going to give it one more go. Maybe the third time is the charm. Questions, and we'll incorporate them to the best of our ability. I just hear myself over and over again. I don't know what's happening. Okay, well, I think with that, we will problem solve and see if we can get this back with Jason in a little bit. And we're going to hear a few words from the chief of the Mohegan tribe, Chief Lynn Malerba.
Greetings from our Mohegan people. We are so pleased that you are continuing on with your annual tradition of the International Festival of Arts and Ideas. I think the theme of stories, sovereignty, and imagining forward is so very important because as we think about our communities and how they're integrated and how they're related, it is the expression of our cultures that we begin to understand one another and we connect with one another in a different way. It's especially important, I think, this year to use arts as healing. Our nation needs to heal from the virus that we've been undergoing. Our world needs to heal with all of the environmental challenges that we've had. So I think it's important that you continue on and that you recognize the power that arts has to change lives. I love the fact that you're thinking about imagining forward. We have a Mohegan phrase that is exactly that. It's Ayakwamch Wachi Umpitak, which means dream ahead. And in Mohegan tradition, we believe that if we dream it, it can come true. And I believe that even with this time, we can dream of a better time and we can dream of healing within all of our communities and our nations. And the fact that you use arts to do so, I believe, is extremely powerful. And so I would just offer this one last phrase in Mohegan to all of you. Mutawi waitu wokanch, Waskichikiawan. Many blessings upon you all.
Okay. Thanks so much to Chief Lynn Malerba for those opening comments, and to Liz and Jason, despite any technical difficulties. Akwai, Nituis, Achokais. My name is Madeline. I'm from the Mohegan Nation here in Connecticut. And okay, we're temporarily missing one of our panelists, but they will return when the cyberspace allows them to. So really quickly, I just wanted to share sort of some of the formulations around how this particular panel was formed. Early in the pandemic, Liz and I had a conversation about sort of the moment we were in, and the healing that needed to occur. And I was looking out on the river, the same river that my ancestors looked out on, as they faced many different illnesses over time. And I was just sort of thinking about how what are the things that we carry forward from our stories that actually really help us in these processes, in these deep processes of healing, but also how our stories actually help us imagine forward, how our languages, how our sovereignty, all of that connects. And I specifically assembled a group of, I would say on the younger side of theater artists, because I think that when really thinking about what is coming next, what are we dreaming forward, I think that this group is particularly adept at doing so. I'm grateful for this panel for many reasons. As Native theater artists, we're too often separated from each other, or set apart, or forced to represent, or to be studied or educate. And rarely are we given permission to just be ourselves in relaxed and honest, deep conversation. So everyone on this panel is a theater artist, but also many things. You have a series of interdisciplinary artists, or even Mary Katheryn, who's an artist attorney. So I really believe that you'll learn a lot from all of them, but be unable to lock them down in any way, which I think is really, really important, because we're constantly being forced into different kinds of boxes. Also, everyone on this panel already knows each other, which makes things a little bit more informal. So we're not here to lecture, but to be in conversation, to discover, to rally, to reveal, to dream forward. And this conversation is definitely not going to teach you any universal truths. So it'll hopefully be joyous, deep, and complex. And also, I just want to acknowledge that as the past few weeks have brought to light, or not to light, actually, have brought to the attention of those who were not already aware that this nation is founded deeply on white supremacy, I'm sure that, the ways in which the things that we're speaking up are intersectional with the ways we need to work toward fighting against, all of the oppression of Black folks, and really lifting up Black Lives Matter in this moment. We'll find ways, there'll be continuous ways that intersects with this conversation. But I just wanted to acknowledge the current role of police brutality in this moment, the way it is also intersectional in Native communities, but the way that we also specifically still want to make sure that we're continuing to work toward anti-racist action for everyone. Okay, that was a big old ramble. So, welcome to StreamYard. I'm not nervous at all, can you tell? All right, so we're each gonna do an intro. On the intro, we're gonna be alone on our screen. We're gonna talk a little bit about our work, and then we're all gonna come back together for a facilitated conversation. So everyone else is gonna briefly disappear while I awkwardly do my intro. So for those of you who know me, I'm primarily a theater director. I'm also the executive director of the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program here in New Haven, which Mary Katheryn was the executive director of before. And my work as a director is strongly influenced by our Mohegan philosophies. From early on in my work, when I was an actor, I was constantly running into situations where someone would say something like, "Oh, sing that song, that Indian song," and then stare at a group of Native people from different Native nations, expecting us to have some sort of magical universal song that we all knew, just because the lack of knowledge was so prolific at that moment. And so I became a director at that time thinking, well, the bar was actually very low in terms of what it would take to be a good director. It would just take a very small amount of common sense and respect for those that you're working with. But my directing sort of philosophies came a lot from the fact that I was raised on, our traditional Mohegan stories. And then I was also brought up going to see a lot of, outdoor Shakespeare and other forms of performance that then I was applying those philosophies to in a slightly untraditional manner. So things like, the idea of story medicine, the idea that traditionally stories have always been used as a form of healing, that any story we tell actually creates real world harm or healing, have influenced a lot of my work, a lot of the kinds of stories that I've chosen to tell and the way that I've chosen to tell them, as well as things that I've learned in the Mohegan language have influenced things. At one point when I spoke with an elder, Stephanie Fielding, and asked her what, the Mohegan word for director would be, the closest translation was Katheryn Nagle, which actually translates most closely to our heart, she leads us there. So really thinking about what are the ways that as a Mohegan, I'm bringing my sort of like internal philosophies and artistries to the work in complex ways, whether or not it's a Native specific project. So just to sort of give you like a tiny dip into some of my aesthetic as a director. Great. So these are a couple of images from the Magic Flute production that I directed in 2015. It was a production of the Magic Flute. It was not, an all-Native cast or anything like that. But in thinking about what is an Enlightenment journey in that moment, we really focused on the ways that the woodlands offer specific teachings. These are images from Whale Song, which is a beautiful play by Inupiaq playwright Kathy Rexford that Asa actually did the costume designs for. And again, it was about how do we actually have these conversations about how we build a world? How is the world of the people different from the world of the whales? And how are we really specific and intentional with the rules of how we build worlds? Thinking about how different people's philosophies actually intersect with the worlds that we're building. And then really quickly, this is just an image from my solo show, Where We Belong, at Shakespeare's Globe in London. And that entire piece centers on this question of, as an indigenized person, in like what people keep referring to as a globalized world, is there a place where I get to belong? And so that play really documented my journey going across the ocean to study Shakespeare in England, and how it mirrored the journeys that my ancestors, Samson and Mom at Wayonamun, had to go on in the 1700s to England to fight for rights for our people here in at Mohegan. So that's just sort of like a quick little snippet. We're going to talk much more deeply in the conversation about how things actually intersect in terms of like our ideologies as artists. But I just want to like toss it over now to Mary Katheryn, who will share a little bit about her work.
Great. Thank you so much, Maddie. It's an honor to be on this panel with you and all of the amazing other theater artists. We've all gotten to work together in one way or another, and speaking with all of you here tonight is a privilege and an honor. Good evening. My name is Mary Katheryn. I'm a citizen of the Cherokee Nation, which is today in Oklahoma. Before our forced removal, my family lived in what is now northern Georgia, in a town called Rome, Georgia, and New Echota, Georgia. And, my theater work, unfortunately, I don't have photos to show. I didn't get them together. So you're just going to have to stare at my face the whole time. And these beautiful earrings that Kenny K. Ramos gave me as a beautiful, beautiful gift when we worked on a play together recently. And it's just one thing I have to say about the Native theater community is that all of our collaborations have been so powerful and giving in so many ways. And I think that that's true for all of our tribes across the country in terms of how we historically viewed the art of storytelling. It is a gift, something to be given and to be returned. And, I think that trying to come from that perspective, an indigenous perspective, whether you're Cherokee or Mohegan or Navajo or any of the other hundreds and hundreds of tribes that continue to exist, or the hundreds of tribes that don't exist today, but you have this perspective of storytelling that is a little bit at odds with sort of how mainstream theater works in the United States. And when I first started working in theater, I think that I was a little shocked and amazed that that it wasn't as advanced as I thought it would be in terms of the way in which Native people were presented. And just as by way of a short, quick example, I was a lawyer before I was a playwright, technically, unless you count the dreams that I had as a young child, meaning I was actually a playwright. But legitimately, professionally, I was a lawyer before I was a playwright. And I remember sitting in law school and reading these Supreme Court cases, that described our people, Native people, as racially inferior savages and heathens. And I thought, this is really problematic, and challenged it. And my law professors were all like, that's the law. It's never been overturned. And it's true. You can go and look. There are Supreme Court cases from the 1800s. Some of the cases from the 1900s and today rely on those cases and cite them, saying that we're racially inferior savages and heathens. So when I went to theater after having my legal background, I kind of thought, a lot of people in theater are very liberal, very progressive. They're not going to be down with that. They're not going to be cool with that, right? We can't live in a country where the Supreme Court says we're racially inferior because we don't worship Christ. That's ludicrous, right? No one's going to buy into that. And I lived in New York for 5 years after I finished law school and clerking for some federal judges. During those 5 years, I never once saw a mainstream theater in New York that wasn't a Native theater like Merinda or Eagle Project, and those theaters are wonderful. But I'm talking about a non-Native mainstream theater produce a single play by a Native playwright. And I saw multiple performances of Redface where we were ridiculed and dehumanized on stage. And it was kind of heartbreaking because I really, I held the theater in a higher regard, from the dreams of a little girl who just loved playwriting and loved acting. I was always never going to make it as an actress. So thank God I can be a playwright. But, it just was heartbreaking. And the theaters, the conversation that Maddie was having, I've had similar ones, and I'm very thankful to the folks who have stood up from other institutions and welcomed us, and all the work that, for instance, Ned Blackhawk did at Yale University to create the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts Program. As Maddie mentioned, I was the founding executive director. She's now the executive director. And we've been able to do great things there that have supported really talented, brilliant Native artists. But at the end of the day, I think we're here to celebrate where we are now. Because if you look at what's happened in the last 5 or 6 years, we've seen dozens of theaters across the United States produce their first play by a Native playwright. This is groundbreaking. Now, we're not that generation because somehow Maddie or Ty or Tara or I or Kinsale or Asa are super, super, super special, right? We just happen to magically be here. This is the work that has been culminating for generations and generations and generations, right? There are hundreds and thousands, if not however many more Native theater artists behind us who did this work so that we could be the ones that get produced here today. But now we're getting produced. And for the first time ever, theaters like the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, Arena Stage, Yale Repertory Theater, Kansas City Rep, Portland Center Stage are saying, for the first time in our history, we're going to produce a play by a Native playwright. Now, what do we do with that? Because now we have this enormous responsibility, right? And so I'm talking, but I know I need to move on here. But I just think that in terms of where we are collectively as Native theater artists, it's a very exciting time. It's a very important time. And it's also a very important time to also step back and ask, where are we going, and how we're going to work together to do that, and for what purpose, right? Because now the door is starting to be opened, and that really means something. So thank you so much for having me on here. I'm going to pass it along to Asa now, who is a super brilliant, amazing colleague of ours.
Hi, I'm Asa Benally. I am half Navajo and half Cherokee. And I guess I grew up in northern Arizona, and I think in terms of what we've kind of been talking about in terms of this idea of storytelling, in Native cultures, being a storyteller is a very important role for someone to have. And working as a costume designer, I think people always kind of think that, being Native American and being a costume designer is kind of almost like an anomaly. But then, I kind of have to explain to them. I'm like, well, I'm like a storyteller. Like I put together, a story through what somebody wears on stage. So it's actually, I'm like, it's actually a very ancient tradition in my culture. So, but I think one sort of like really interesting thing, in terms of my journey, I mean, being a costume designer was it's the only job I've ever had. It's like the only thing I know how to do. But it took a very long time to finally, meet other Native theater artists. Like my last year of grad school at Yale was when the Indigenous Performing Arts program like had their, inaugural year. And I was just kind of like, it was just kind of amazing. Like all of a sudden, there were so many Native theater artists and we were all starting to find each other. And, I've, been working for almost 20 years in this business. And it's only been within the past really like 4 or so years where, I've met all these and worked with, different Native directors and actors and playwrights. And it's been really amazing to kind of just see that, finally sort of come to fruition. Kind of like what you're talking about, Mary Katheryn, about how this isn't like a random moment in history. Like we've been sort of like building up to this. But yeah, and I will have a link to my website and I'll post that. And so everyone can kind of see sort of like all the different types of shows I've worked on. So I think that's it for my introduction. So now I will pass it on to Tara.
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah. Hey, y'all. He's Jay Tara Chohochikades. So hello, everybody. My name is Tara, and I am a citizen of the Seminole Nation of Oklahoma, and I am also Muskogee Creek. And yeah, so thank you for that, Asa. We were just talking in the chat about how, I also have photos of costumes Asa has designed. So we really are such an interconnected community. Yeah, so thinking about where we are and then where we are moving forward in this particular moment in time, something that really sticks for me is that I've been doing theater since I was about 8. I started out as an orphan in Oliver the musical, and then here we are today as a director, a playwright. I'm our artistic director of a theater company named Tela Tulsa, which is located in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And we are specifically dedicated to Latino and Native artists and their stories. And we are the only theater in the state dedicated to Latino stories, and currently the second active theater also dedicated to Native stories. So shout out to Oklahoma Indigenous Theater Company. They are amazing friends. Yeah. What else do? I do a lot of things. Yeah, so I'm also one of the co-founders of Groundwater Arts, and we are predominantly like women of color led. We're half Indigenous, and we're working towards moving the field towards climate justice, and that includes racial justice, disability justice, because they're all intersected. I also do a lot of other things that I don't remember at this moment in time. But the reason why I do like so many things, like I've also been a sound designer for multiple productions, is that growing up, there wasn't any representation for me in the theater. There weren't any roles that were written for Native people. And so I just learned how to adapt. Like I worked as a professional stage manager for a while. And like really enjoyed that. It was really fun, but that's not what I knew I was called to do, because I didn't have that agency to advocate for other Native folks. And then I went into my undergraduate degree program as a musical theater performer, and then learned really, really quickly, being the second Native person they've ever had in their department, and currently only one of 3 students of color during my class, that the opportunities and access for me were not there. very explicitly, but we'll leave that there. Anyway, and so for my entire life, I did not know Native theater artists existed. I was never taught. Whenever I asked, teachers and professors, they were just like, I don't know, you're the only one I know. Anyway, but I knew that could not be true. And so my junior year, I went to our campus library and I went into the basement, which is very scary and also very telling because it was in the basement, but we'll get there in a minute. And I was down there and I saw a bright yellow book on the shelf. And, it stuck out because it was very like drab and scary down there. And so something really bright caught my attention like a fish. So I go over to that book, I pull it out and it says Yellow Robe on the spine. And I was like, that sounds interesting. And whenever I opened it up, it was an anthology of Bill Yellow Robe's plays. And it was at that moment in time, I realized that, wait a minute, like a Native playwright exists, Native theater artists exist. They have to exist, right? And then from there, like I finally like spiraled, the lovely internet and like found all of these Native artists who have been creating work for decades. And I was sitting here and I was like, why was I not taught about these? Okay, we know why, that's not a real question, but that really got me thinking. And so as I moved forward in my artistic journey, learned very, very early that directing is something I really like to do because you have that agency in the room to advocate for your design team, advocate for your actors, and then stumbled into playwriting where I learned, wait a minute, I can put inclusion writers on my plays, that they have to be directed by Native people. Because now as I'm looking where the theater is currently, I'm pretty disappointed that a lot, not all, but a lot of these major productions for the first time don't have a Native director. They have maybe one Native designer on their team, if that. There have been many who didn't have any, and that's not okay. And so when I'm thinking about the future of theater, I'm thinking about equity. I'm thinking about seeing Natives in every single level of the theater, from artistic leadership all the way down to the contract person we bring in to help build costumes, right? Like that level of equity and access. And so to round this out, I'm going to share my screen. So I'm ready for that to happen. Great. And so I'm just going to share a little bit about just like some artistic photo stuff. So, we end on some artistic fun stuff. So this first production is from Teletulsa, and it was Hamlet del Principe de Denmark. And so it was an adaptation of Hamlet that I did that was set in pre-colonial Mexico, and it framed the entire premise of Hamlet as Claudius seeing what these colonizers have done to indigenous people and wanting to replicate that. And obviously that does not end well because, spoiler, it doesn't. And then here is another image from Bound, which is a play that I wrote and also directed last year. And it's about the border wall and how we can't do that because Indigenous sovereignty. It also goes back to the 1850s about the Gadsden Purchase in modern day. Another one from Bound here. Anyway, another one from Bound. This is Wolfen de Castro. If you don't know him, he's amazing. Anyway, so shout out Wolfen. This is another one from Hamlet, where again, we're able to bring in those pre-colonial influences and mix them with those colonial influences and how they work within that world, which is really exciting. And so, as a director and playwright, this is from the true story Pocahontas last summer. And these are costumes that Mr. Asa had designed. So whenever I think about what I'm interested in, I am solely interested in stories that move towards equity for Native people, Indigenous people, people of color. And I'm also interested in stories that take these colonial plays and flip them on their heads. Because I think about like Shakespeare, right? And then I'm done sharing my screen here. I think about, these classic American plays and how they, as much as we try, they do not transcend these colonial lines. Like they are so colonial. And whenever I think about putting Indigenous people, putting people of color in those positions to perform those roles, I think about how does that help us? Does that harm us? I think it does. But that's just something I'll leave to percolate on, is how can we be expected to perform these roles, direct these roles, et cetera, that are so written, like deeply, deeply written within settler colonialism. Like, how do we do that? And thinking forward of what are the plays that we program? How do we take something like Shakespeare and make it Indigenous? Or do we just not whatsoever? Like, what are we doing? What's the future? So those are little nuggets that I'll leave there. And then with that, I'm going to throw it off to Ty.
Bonjour, anin, Thai, Indigenous Kaz, Gijig, Indigenous Kaz, Waswaganin, and Dunjabam, Magizin, and Dodem. Hello, my name is Ty Defoe. As artist, as activist, as, person who happens to be Indigenous, to create a foundation, a bed to provide tools for people, to curate a conversation and dialogue about what's happening in our world today. I myself have been given the gift of stories just from, my namekeepers, my grandmother, my family, and inherently, I think, embedded and embodied in climate justice, in language, in giving marginalized and oppressed people's voices, in celebrating people coming together, two-legged, four-legged, winged, rooted. I think all of these living things are deeply important, and people need to recognize and honor the perspective that isn't dominant in conversations, dominant in spaces, but the idea that we are taking recognition and creating awareness for all living things, from something that's very small, like, example, a blade of grass, and take recognition to something that's amazing and mystic and beautiful, like a soaring eagle. It's decolonizing things that were placed upon Indigenous people in the way that this dance means that you can use your body and celebrate who you are, how your spirit wants to move. Ajijak, I hear you. I see you. Your voice has power. Use it. Sing your song and fly. Are you ready to hear a story? Wow, Buju Nindawe na Maganog Thai Indigenous Kaz Waswaganan and Dunjapa Magaza Nindo Dem. My name is Ty Defoe. You can just call me Ty. I just want to give a shout out to friends and relatives and to the panelists. Y'all, it's just so good to be here, especially with Madeline Sayet, who's just, is like the glue sometimes that brings us together. So major shout out to the panelists. I was asked to talk a little bit about my work through this intro, and I was like, how in the heck am I going to do that? It all started for me when I was born. A little star twinkle in my mother's eye, and then came out into the world. And at every opportunity, I try not to be boxed in or be a type of binary as it relates to art making. And I do feel like this is a value of the Anishinaabe people. So I'm Anishinaabe on one side, and nobody's perfect. I'm also Oneida, or Six Nations, from my mother's side. And, you know, growing up with instilled Anishinaabe cultural values, the Algonquian-speaking language dialect, you know, our borders that were placed upon us in 1793 were just placed upon us. And so I think what we had to do at the time of past history is like create stories for medicine, create narrative reparations. And so from that, I do feel like it's my duty, my obligation. It's also a joy as resistance to bring about art pieces. And I definitely hearken back to a sister back home, Winona LaDuke, says, as it relates to dreaming, if you are not dreaming 7 generations ahead, then you are not dreaming big enough. So if you are not dreaming 7 generations ahead or forward, you are not dreaming big enough. And that is something that always stuck and stayed with me as a time I was a very small child. And then with that, I think as I'm making art and everything, I always go back to mission and values and people that I'm collaborating with, because I'm also a collaborative artist. One is to know, love is to know peace and to honor all the creation, to have respect for it, and to walk through this life with integrity and honesty, and to accept self as part of creation. So to also know humility, and to cherish knowledge, that it's a form of wisdom, and to know these things are to know truth. So I try to bring that as much as possible to my artistic process as I can, because I also rely heavily on the process and not necessarily living in a transactional you know, culture of the product, even though the product is very, very important. So those are just, you know, some things that I'm thinking about as Ty here, you know, representing a multitude of communities. And as you saw in the video, you know, the depths of Newtok, Alaska, and small libraries sleeping on the floor, to the big bad Broadway. And I feel like at every opportunity, I want to amplify Indigenous voices and create equity among theater right now. And I feel like that's what I have for you all today. So thank you so much. And I cannot wait to have this discussion. Miigwech for having me.
Hi everyone! Yat Kinsale Hueston Nishye. Nat Odene Trachin initially. Belagana Bashishtin Eshihedashi Che. Bilagana Dashanale. Akotego Atsan initially. Hi. Excuse me. My name is Kinsale Hueston. I'm so excited to be here. I am Dene, and my family is from the Navajo Nation, Navajo Mountain specifically, and I'm a poet, performer, and an educator. And I'm also currently a student at Yale, so I'm a rising junior, and a lot of my work during the year consists of balancing being a student and being a performer and a touring poet and speaker, and also an educator. So I tour the country and I hold workshops in educational and community spaces, so that can be tribal communities or libraries, museums. And I'm also the editor and founder of Changing Women Collective, which is it's actually doing a lot of anti-racist work right now and creating actionables, but usually it operates just as a literary platform and a digital space for Black, Indigenous, and POC, women, femmes, and non-binary folks. And I also act in the Yale Indigenous Performing Arts program while I'm at Yale, and I'm an alum of the program. So I actually was a poet that was invited to Yale back when I was in high school. So a very fun fact, and how I met a lot of the wonderful people on this panel. And basically how I got into the arts was I grew up just outside of LA, and I was basically raised within creatively the Los Angeles arts community, specifically the urban Indian arts community. So I've actually acted in MK's play, a lot of the plays by the people on this panel. And I got to have a really good amount of wonderful opportunities created by Indigenous playwrights and creators before I even graduated high school. And I was really lucky to have that experience because it helped me understand that there are so many ways to represent and create. And as a high schooler growing up in a very white part of Southern California and having to balance that with going to the reservation and seeing my home community and how there were no white people there, it was very hard to grapple with my identity and how to express myself, how to grapple with the frustration that I had when my fellow high schoolers didn't even, they had no baseline knowledge of Indigenous history or contemporary Indigenous identities. And so growing up in LA and in the arts community gave me a family. And I know a lot of people, even on this call, probably only remember me as like a very young 15, 16-year-old actress because I started off acting. But the arts community helped me grow into myself and create my own work. And in MK's case, her plays even helped me learn about federal Indian law as a sophomore in high school, which is something I would have never gotten the opportunity to learn about otherwise. And I learned how to incorporate stories and family histories, archival work, world building into my own poetry and into my own writing and creative endeavors. So I guess what led me to poetry in the first place was my frustration with underrepresentation, obviously, and the classic lack of representations for Native peoples and the lack of knowledge that my peers had, even though we were young and supposedly woke, And so all of my anger and my grief and my frustration, I found that I could express through poetry, which was a form of art that I had loved since I was a very young child. I remember I had this anthology of poems by Maya Angelou, Emily Dickinson, mostly white poets, but I still loved the form nonetheless because it gave me a way to tell stories like my grandmother had told me and how the matriarchs of my family had told me our family stories. It gave me a creative way to do that and share them with my community. And it was also good for me to break down things for myself about my identity, about my relationship to the world around me, about all of my relations, as many of us like to say. And it also allowed me to venture into the world of spoken word, which is a whole different adventure because for me, that combined my love of acting with the written word. I could stand on a stage and I had the mic and I had a spotlight and I could say whatever I wanted. I could go on for an indescribable amount of time about whatever issues I wanted. And that was my moment to talk about Native representations, talk about MMIW, and nobody could take that away from me. So as a national student poet in high school, I got the chance to learn very early on how to community build through art and writing and performance, how to facilitate workshops, how to help other Native kids write poetry that they felt was very true to themselves and their identities, and how to provide tools to underrepresented communities to tell stories on their own terms, not the colonial way of telling stories. You could mess with time, you could mess with the typical way of doing research and archival work, and it didn't necessarily have to be the typical white way of telling stories to be true. And also as I got older and as I've been in college, I've been learning how to combine anti-racist work and the types of things that I'm interested as a college student with art, and how we can use art to elevate other young voices and how we can empower them, how we can work on radical healing within our communities and ourselves through art, and how we can use art to move forward and facilitate change, like radical change and structural change, to combat settler colonialism in the settler colonial state, which I think is super relevant right now, given the Black Lives Matter movement, given what's happening on the Navajo Nation with COVID-19, how I've been seeing artists, especially Black women artists and Black Indigenous women, using art to create dialogues and kind of bring in these new visions of the future. That's kind of what art does, I think, is it's like because I'm very interested in like abolitionist work, it's like art is that literal bringing in of envisioning a future and bringing it to life in the present moment. And I really love that. So I wanted to read a quick poem because I didn't have a video or anything, but it's very relevant to what this panel is about, as in I wrote it during quarantine. I wrote 3 quarantine poems for my mothers, whether that's, mother in the sense of my actual mother, my grandmother, my land, where I come from, Earth Mother, all of that, mothers and the idea of mothers. And so I just wanted to read that very quickly, and then I'll be done with my intro. Quarantine poem for my mothers. I have in my chest a hummingbird that refuses to die. Years before me, women with bird shadow in their hair walked over mountains, pressed flat the red sand with their migration. Just out of range, their furious racing hearts. When I lived in my mother's fossil, these women hardened their skin with morning prayer and kept time with the seasonal slumber of seeds. If we can carve gods out of wood, imagine what we can do with our bodies, flightless and yet so close to the air, filling ourselves with offerings and the outlines of our daughters. And that's just my short little poem, so I'm going to throw it back. I guess I'm the last one on the panel, so this is me throwing it back.
Yay. Thank you guys all so much for those intros. They were all so beautiful and so powerful and just make me so excited for this conversation because I know it's going to be the conversation where each one of you continues to go deeper and deeper and deeper on the things that, you know, are in all of our hearts. So really quickly, just one thing I want to acknowledge coming out of that and listening to both Tara's story of like miraculously finding Bill's book in this dark basement. And then Kinsale also experiencing Mary Katheryn's plays. I also, if it hadn't been for the fact that I encountered Bill's plays in undergrad, I wouldn't have volunteered to go up to Maine to be in one of his plays the summer after I graduated, and thereby known that Native theater was a movement, was happening, was something I could be involved in. So really quickly, because I promised him that I would do this, if Bill, if you're out there, here is your free spam. Can you see that? Can they let it down? Just put it on the screen for 1 second, and then I'll move on with the real conversation. Okay, great. I have to keep my promises. I have to keep my promises to our elders. Okay, now we can take it off. Okay, great. But no, because so many of, as Mary Katheryn was saying, you know, not just Bill. I mean, you know, we're not going to be able to name them all, but you know, everyone, you know, at Spider Woman, Carolyn Dunn, Suzanne Harjo. I mean, anyone wants to toss out more names. I mean, there's so many people who worked so hard for generations, and we are all in a very privileged position in some ways to be able to actually be allowed into these institutions that kept people out for so long, that said no, that spit in people's faces repeatedly. The fact that we're being listened to at all, it gives us, we are so much further in the journey because of all of the work that has been done by our elders. So really quickly, the first question that we're going to all dive into is actually a pretty deep question. But it's, what does sovereignty mean to you, and how does it affect your artistic practice? Mary Katheryn's leading in like I'm ready to go.
Thanks, Maddie. I'll take that. Well, it's a play published by, no, I'm just kidding. You can buy it at, no, I'm just kidding. You know, but it's actually a really, 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 really important question. It also happens to be a line in my play. So, you know, which I there were moments where different people on my journey told me I should cut that line, that it was a little kind of like, you know, like I was evoking the name of the play and it was a little bit too like hitting the audience on the head. But I'm like, no, it's actually a real question, right? What does sovereignty mean? And it's like I never give my own definition of it. I always like to quote other people. You know, I think Billy Frank, one of the most amazing Native activists of the 20th century, has. I'm going to mess up his quote, but you can Google it. I mean, he was like, "Sovereignty is when I fish in the same waters as my ancestors. The right to fish was guaranteed in our treaties that we signed with the United States. When I fish there, that is sovereignty, right?" I know elders who have said sovereignty is when I speak my language, because we wouldn't have our nations if we didn't have our languages, right? I know as a lawyer, I also understand sovereignty as the inherent right to govern, to be a nation, but not necessarily to govern in like this Western, you know, powerful police force, lock you up in jail kind of govern. Right? If you look at those traditional forms of government that we have, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but you know, being Cherokee, it's like I look back at Cherokee government pre, 1776 or 1492. It was actually a real democracy, not like a maybe you get to vote or maybe you don't, depending on the color of your skin and whether or not you have this kind of driver's license. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It was actually real democracy, and I think that. That right is very much wrapped up in sovereignty. And when I think about the stage and I think about the sovereignty of our stories, I think about our right as Native people, regardless of what tribe we're from, all of us, the right to share our stories instead of having a non-Native share them for us, because that has been the history of the American theater, right? Where our sovereignty over our own stories has been erased and replaced. And I think what we're all of us, and so many thousands of amazing Natives who aren't a talking head on this screen right now, have been doing is working to restore that sovereignty.
Great. Anybody else want to jump in? I'll say something really. What'd you say?
Well,
yeah, I know. She nailed it on the
I know,
head.
it's like, yeah, it's good.
Okay, well, I would say then, all right, let's push it a little further. Okay, for those listeners who might not. Okay, so I'm gonna jump in with like a less like a more I guess a more emotional version of the same thing, so that maybe like it complicates the thing a little bit also, just for the people who I feel like everyone in this chat's like, Mary Katheryn nailed it. Yep, we know that's exactly what sovereignty means. But I'm like, the other people out there might still not fully get, I think, how sovereignty could mean something different in some ways to each of us, in terms of how it's enacted, in terms of how it like actually shows up in artistic practice. So that's where I'm gonna like push now, which is I think like in thinking about, right, like when you're making art, there has been this sort of historical tendency by the American theater to present, as it's been described, Native theater as a monolithic, when in fact, like, you know, we know there's more than 563 federally recognized tribes, which means that actually the practicing of that sovereignty is different in every single instance. And so for me, when I'm making theater, when I'm thinking about things from a Mohegan perspective, it's not the same as when Mary Katheryn's thinking about things from a Cherokee perspective, right? If I'm thinking about things like having grown up in the woodlands, having been raised on, you know, stories of the Makiawisug, like, you know, like the very nature of the stories and the language and the information around me, which is exactly what Mary Katheryn said, is different from each of these other nations, which also means that the way that I tell stories is a little bit different. That the things that I like care about and value in those stories are a little bit different. And so I just was curious if there's anything from any of your particular nations that actually like is something that is a value or an idea. Some of you've already mentioned in your intros that shows up in your storytelling that you found actually inspires or affects how you show up in your work, which I know Kinsale's already addressed. I know Ty's already, I mean, you've all kind of gone into this. So it's just if there's anything additional.
Yeah, this is Ty. I'll just speak a little bit and yeah, all the things that Mary Katheryn said were like so spot on, and I'll just add to it is about the claiming of specificity, like the details of art that I get to claim, both in practice and in quote unquote what's on the stage, or that people get to witness and view and see. I feel like there's such a power of that, to have self-jurisdiction over the narrative that gets put out into the world, and whichever form of art that you're making. I feel like that's really, really important. And that also made me think about, you know, as you're talking about the fish where the waters are, the language, the reclaiming of language is also sovereign to me, and also specifically also to land. And I feel like Robin Kilmer writes a lot about that in writing Sweetgrass, about, you know, like we are in Anishinaabe philosophy, we are the youngest quote unquote species of two-legged beings on the earth, and there's so much that we have to learn. So in fact, if we are decentralizing ourselves in the great shape of democracy of the circle, then we are also thinking about two-legged, four-legged, winged, and the rooted at the same time.
You know, I'm going to jump in and say something else here. But I actually think a lot of Tara's work deconstructs false notions of sovereignty, especially when, Tara, you approach borders. And right? And so I think we understand inherent sovereignty, but then what is it when there's a sort of like a false or a colonial sovereignty put on top of that? And I love how your work deconstructs that.
Yeah. Yes. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I've been thinking about that, because we know what sovereignty looks like within our, not just our tribal communities, but within our homes, within our matriarchal structures, et cetera, et cetera. And then but we also have to juxtapose that in this colonial system, those don't get along very well. And then how can we continue to stay true to our community, to our practices, to our principles, while creating and operating in an art form that is inherently colonial, right? It's, we walk into a process. I always speak to myself specifically, like I walk into a process to an artistic director or whomever, and there's already this notion of what the process will look like. The process is how it's done colonially. And so within my communities, time, oh my gosh, I swear like a broken record. Those listening at home, don't call me out. But for us, time is a relative, right? And so we treat it like you would your grandma, like your auntie. You give them more time if they need more time. And that's how I operate, like within my own rehearsal schedules. And I've gotten so much pushback from the institution about that, because it's, oh no, this is a very hard 10 to 6. We do this, boop, 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 boop. And I'm like, no, like the time, like we need to take care of the time, and the time don't need all that. Or even whenever last summer I was doing a production that shall remain unnamed. And some of y'all know what I'm talking about. Asa knows what I'm talking about. Anyway, yeah, shade. Anyway, but there was a moment in time where the lead Native actress needed to not be at rehearsal. And as such, the rest of the company did not need to be at rehearsal. This was a very quick process. But again, thinking about time and taking care of it like a relation, like we'd see in the company, don't need it. Wanted to cancel rehearsal, called it a day. I got so much pushback from the institution that they made me have rehearsal anyway. And it was pointless. It was useless. People didn't need it. There was no way of trying to take care of folks' spirits in that time and continue on forward when they didn't need it. Because what they needed was rest. What they needed was to go away, digest everything that was going on so they can come back anew. That's an extreme example, but I'm even thinking about for equity actors, Monday's equity day off. But a lot of folks still have day jobs. And so Monday being your only day off, you may have to go into the office. So you don't get a day off. So what happens if we also have Sundays off? What are we going to do? Is the show going to suffer? Spoiler, it doesn't. Because what we're doing is taking care of the time and the artists and the people like we're supposed to. Uplift and center that community. And the end product is amazing. I think about Bound, and whenever we were going through the schedule, I said, we're taking Sundays off because there were folks in the cast who are parents, like Elizabeth Rolston. Let's highlight you. You're an amazing girl. And thinking about, how does that work whenever other people have other responsibilities to their communities, to their families? So what? We're going to lose 36 hours of rehearsal time. And you know what? It didn't matter. The show was still great. We didn't need it. And so thinking forward, and what I would love to see for the institutions is yes, highlight, amplify. We are not a monolith. We all do things differently. I am Seminole and Muskogee, and we throw down different than my Ojibwe and Oneida friends. We don't do that, right? And so that number one, but also number two is whenever I think about sovereignty, I think of autonomy and how we create, and having that trust to create how we know we need to and what's best for our community of actors and folks, and trust that the work still gets done. And so trying to separate, this is how we do things from the institutional perspective, aka colonial, and this is how all the natives do it, and really just eliminating that binary and just letting us exist, letting us be. I don't understand why that's so difficult to do. Yeah, that's my hot take for the moment.
Does anybody else want to throw anything in, or I will bump over to the next question?
I had a quick thought.
Yeah.
I think one thing for the audience to realize is that all these relationships that we've developed, it's they're very new. I've worked with Maddie and Tara and everyone a handful of times, and I think Tara kind of talking about institutions. It's you have to give Native theater artists some space together to create and to explore, because that whole concept of like, you know, hard schedules, time, like deadlines, you know, I mean, that's just kind of the world we live in. But I think there's just been like a lot of discussion about how, you know, from my perspective, like other designers I know, it's like the only way to feel successful is to like work on like 5 shows at once and like just be on this like insane like assembly line, you know. But I think for me, what's always been something I've sort of like tried to figure out was, you know, because in Native culture, like any type of artistry, I mean, it's like really closely linked to like, you know, spiritual aspects. Like, you know, your creative talents are, you know, given by the creator, like, you know, and so that, taking that, and then, you know, for me, like creating like a career that has like this, like, you know, this value of like money on it. It's just sort of like this whole like balance of, you know, how do you survive by honoring like these Native creating traditions in a world where you have to pay like, you know, your New York City rent or, you know, your mortgage or, you know, what have you. Yeah, anyway, that was my hot thought.
Great, thank you. Anything else? Otherwise, I'm gonna jump into the next. Okay. Okay, cool. So the next question, and then just so audience folks know, we are going to take questions from the audience. So in order to do that, you're going to have to put them into this little live comment section where you've been commenting. So if you have any questions, you can start popping them in there now. But I'm gonna ask one more question that we're gonna talk amongst ourselves for first. And that question, I'm actually gonna sort of. I'm going to put 2 questions together because I think that I feel so fortunate to be in this group because like so many things that normally I would be trying to find words for, everyone is articulating infinitely better, which means that we can go so much deeper, which I'm so excited about. So this question is 2 questions in one, which is both what kind of either art or stories do you wish was more funded or more produced right now that you could be making, that you wish you were able to be making, that you wish was supported in that way? Whether that's like kinds of stories you want to tell or a specific story or... And then also, I'm adding to that question, if people have thoughts on it, what are the alternative models you think would benefit like those projects or those projects being created or those stories being able to be told? So whether that's like a tag on about like, you know, like Tara was talking about the institutions and those formats and how those are, you know, not actually conducive to certain kinds of work, or whether it's, you know, maybe there's a different model we could be working in that would enable this to occur. And if we worked in that model, then maybe people would be able to see the value in this. So focusing on the stories and the projects, but if there are other thoughts you have on how it operates within systems, definitely jump in with those. And it can just be like something you've written already that you really want to get produced or something you wish people would listen to. It can really be anything. Or Ace's dream design.
Oh, I know. I think, you know, what, in terms of like types of work to be produced, you know, I think, I mean, theater in like Western history, like it started off as something that was like a part of like religious ceremonies. There was like this whole aspect of, you know, catharsis that, you know, that was like the height, I guess, in which to experience theater. And so I think theater, you know, at this point in time, it is a way to, and I think a lot of, you know, the new Native plays deal with this. It's just sort of like how, like looking back on the past, you know, figuring out something in the present, and then trying to like figure out like solutions to have like a good future. So I think that there is definitely this whole aspect of exploring like the emotional and exploring, you know, the trauma on the stage in the rehearsal room together, that can just sort of, you know, the future.
So Asa, whenever you said that, it made me think, and I promise I'll be short.
You don't have to be.
Yes, I do. I want to share space. Everybody gets space. But it's that, we as a people have been so resilient since 1492, right? And have experienced these mass levels of trauma over a long period of time. And whenever our bodies are experience that level of trauma, and we're talking like from boarding schools, genocide, slavery. And so lots of us, not just Native folks, but especially with our Black peers, understand that level of trauma is whenever you have too much of that cortisol gene in your system, it alters gene expression. And that altered gene expression then gets passed down from birth giver to child and continues on through the generations. And genetic scientists are just now tracking that and noticing that we have these altered DNA patterns. So to that, I like to say, we done been new, right? We knew intergenerational trauma existed. Kinsale laughs. Anyway, and goes from the generations. And so whenever I think of how do we heal from that, because that is mass community trauma. And I think it's the same way, is that to heal from it, it's mass community-led healing. That's my theory on it. And so whenever I'm thinking about the stories I want to see moving forward, I want to see those healing stories. I want to see those cathartic stories. I would love to just watch a really rom-com Native show that's just so silly, and we don't talk about colonization and our struggles and all that jazz, right? It's just something that's just so silly about who's snagging who, right? One day, I try to write funny stuff, and then
write that play, Tara. Write that play.
I'm ready for it. I would love to. I don't want to direct. I want to direct that play. That sounds fun.
Well, I tried with my most recent play. I'm not trying to plug myself, but Maddie, it's sitting in your inbox, by the way.
Oh, I'm so excited to read
it. Anyway, so I tried with that, and then of course, we still get dramatic. I'm trying. Anyway, but that's what I think about moving forward is that yes, those pieces of education about our trauma are so important. Not just for we as Native people, but for the non-Native people who experience these stories. But also there is plenty of space. We are well-rounded, complex human beings to tell frivolous stories. I would love to see a frivolous musical that's just a bunch of Natives being on stage dancing around with no particular, we must educate and advocate, whatever sort of message.
Just doing the potato dance.
Yeah, just doing the potato dance. That's all. So whenever Asa, you're talking about that's when we think about it, is community-led healing. And we can do that through theater because we've been doing that since, the sun came up in the sky for the first time, is we've been healing through stories and healing in community through these stories together. So that's what I would like to see moving forward.
There had been a while, Ty, just because I know you're going to jump in, where when people had been like, what do you want to do? I'd be like, clouds or pillows for the moon? Because it was just I was just like, it's happy coming of age Native musical. I was like, can we just make it? And then they'd be like, no, why would we want a happy Native coming of age musical? That doesn't make any sense.
Truth. It's all timing. And speaking of that and the potato dance, I actually think that would be a really great in a play. Post this pandemic and COVID, because literally for folks that don't know it, you take a potato and you put it forehead to forehead with maybe a complete stranger, and basically you dance. That's it. So it should happen.
It's not COVID friendly.
It's not COVID friendly. But I was thinking about that, and I definitely would love to stories of Native people being funny. I think Native people are the funniest, and the humor is subtle at times and then just very raunchy at times, and everything in between, and it is so good. I'm just waiting for that that Native comedy. And I was also thinking about stories of indigenous futurism and what that is, not under the guise of Western thought, but more looking at it with an indigenous lens and thinking about that. So the current work that I'm working on is that it is yes, it's healing from history's past, but it's also thinking about the future. And I have a tendency as an artist to lean more towards that, also because they're what, technology and Native people, those two things don't go together. And I'm why can't grandma be sitting in her her wigwam with her iPad because it happens in real life. Like it just like needs to happen in stories. Like we are, as Tara said, very complex people. And no doubt more plays by M.K. Nagle, Tara Moses, like that are doing the work and, you know, providing jobs for our Native folks, which I think are so important. And I'd like to think that we are, you know, living in a type of future, but unfortunately, we need friends and relatives and supporters to keep on doing these new works because they come from the minds. The world that is built by these writers is like, it's phenomenal. So I just wanted to shout out all the talent we have on this panel and otherwise too, like Larissa.
And Kinsale's gonna write a play soon too, right?
Is it in poetry?
Yeah. It could be a choreo poem.
It'd be cool.
I could jump off
My
here.
plays are. No, I'm just kidding.
I love the "we done been new" thing because I think that's what I talk about a lot in like how I was frustrated as a young person, because I think as for me and for a lot of artists, I feel like we're past the point of Native peoples existing, and we want like urban Native stories. We want stories of like, you know, those like sitcoms about the foreign kids who are in college and like they're having fun. Like, why can't they be Native? Books about contemporary Native teens. And like, I think for me growing up, what really I loved was more of what Tommy Orange was going for, which is jumping off and creating something new, talking about urban Native identity, departing from the first wave of Native Renaissance, which was so heavy with grief and generational trauma, and introducing kind of Native tribes and cultures to white audiences. And it was very much marketed towards white audiences. And seeing with the second wave of Native Renaissance literature, how they're kind of jumping off that and creating new definitions of resilience in Native literature. And they're more aiming their work towards tribal communities and Native communities. And I think like that's what I see is tied directly to the last question about like sovereignty and how cultural assets and practices are inextricably tied to the well-being of tribal communities. So who are we writing these stories for when we are creating? And I think like moving forward, we have to be aware of the audience shift that has to happen, going from creating for a predominantly non-Native audience to educate to creating for like your tribal community, or creating for Native audiences to heal. And I really like what was said previously about that, because I think as culture bearers and creatives and storytellers, we can become the agents of change for that shift, which I think really needs to happen. And to kind of shift that colonized way of creating as a person of color for a white audience, creating to educate and being up on the stage as a body to instruct the audience and to tell them everything. That's not our responsibility as artists. It's our responsibility as artists to create for ourselves and what we love in our communities. And especially as Indigenous peoples, to give back to who've given us life and love and the gift of creation, whether that's the land, that's our families, that's what we love. And so I'm really interested right now in how we can create these radical communities where we have art and we share it with our young people, and how we can give these tools directly to the communities we come from, rather than, you know, seeing the epitome of art being, you know, being broadcast on CBS or something to mostly non-natives, and being on stage at Carnegie Hall. Yes, it's a very prestigious place, but who is your art benefiting at that point? But yes, I would love to see a sitcom or something made by natives, for natives, produced by natives. I would love that. And my dream is I've been having dreams about this recently, is acting in like a native superhero Marvel kind of thing, where all the superheroes are native. They have like super fry bread powers or something. I feel like that would be so much fun.
That's all I want to make. I don't want to make anything else. I just want to make super fry bread powers.
Yeah.
So, and then I'll be happy. Okay, cool. Does anybody else have any the final call out to the audience for questions? I'm not going to do what you said. Okay, yeah. Wait. Oh no, that's not a question. Okay, everyone just loves you. There's no questions. Which is fine. Okay, cool. So then I'm going to wrap up with one final question. And then which I'm going to come up with right now. And then we'll close out, because I want to build on what we're already talking about. Wait, there's a question. Oh, it's from Kate. It's a good question. And it is the perfect question to build on what we were just talking about. Yes, and I love this question because for a long time for me early in my work, people kept trying to get me to do like indigenous versions of things, and I would only set them in the future. I would never set them in the past because I just wasn't interested in what that was. I was interested in where we were going. So Kate has asked, what does indigenous futurism mean to you, and how is it embodied, expressed, experienced?
The question went away.
Oh, okay. I can repeat it again.
No, I'm just kidding.
No.
I have a really short answer for that. I feel like it for me, like when I hear that question, I just think of the word, possibilities. Mm. Just kind of like endless possibilities. Yeah, that's all I got.
There's also, I always think about the fact that there's been a couple different instances in sci-fi shows and TV shows where we're in a post-apocalyptic future and native characters aren't defined by being native, and you don't see that like really anywhere else. And like I feel like I've always gravitated towards sci-fi for that reason, because there can be you can exist beyond you can start dreaming further. You can ask what are the questions once we get out of the situation we're in right now. And I think the very act of that has a kind of healing to it. The fact that you're like, okay, like, no, if the limitations we have right now aren't our limitations, but we're past that and we're in these other circumstances, what then do we dream about? And then what then are we imagining when we have a different kind of capacity within our own world?
Maddie,
Ty, what about you?
Yeah, I definitely think, like, for me, it's two words: infinite possibilities. And the images that come to mind are, all the way from our various traditional star maps, although it's like this unknown, like we as human beings are still trying to understand and figure out. And even though we try, I feel like they are just the belief that it's there. So taking this sort of leap into these infinite possibilities.
I also feel like it's intrinsic in the thinking and the always thinking about the next 7 generations. Like, we are never not encountering a kind of indigenous futurism. Like, we're not ever solely located in the present.
Exactly.
I think also it's interesting how, I think futurism is kind of discounted by people because they're like, well, it's all dreaming and envisioning and not acting. But actually, indigenous futurism it's a set of practices in the present that we exercise and we do to help us bring the vision of collective liberation and the vision of what we want closer to us and get us there. It's like an active, it's an active envisioning. So I think people think it's very passive, and that's why they discount it a lot of times. And they turn instead inherently towards models of settler futurity instead of indigenous futurity. But instead, it's a very active thing. And I would like to give a shout out to Ned Blackhawk for making me do a presentation on indigenous futurity this year.
Professor Blackhawk.
Yes, but storytelling and creating is part of engaging with indigenous futurity, because we're bringing those ideas we're talking about and engaging with closer to the present.
I just want to build on that to think that I think that something that's come up in sort of this conversation is the fact, I think for all of us, there's this accountability to the way that we tell stories now that is about enacting the future. That there's a consciousness to that. Not all theater makers make theater with the consciousness that whatever stories we're telling will somehow affect and enact our future. And I feel like that's something that is very present in this conversation, that you don't just do something, you don't just make something, but you're actually thinking about how is that something manifesting these other things that we're trying to work towards. There's a really silly question in the chat. If nobody has any more comments on this very large indigenous futurisms question, there's the question raised by Kinsale's amazing thought about our sitcom where we have Frybird superpowers, which is what would your superpower be?
Our 4th grader was asked this question in his on their online learning. The teacher every Monday has a question of the week, and he picked teleportation, which I think I might have to pick here. I think teleportation. Of course, I would add the time on it, since time is not linear and it's circular. So I could go anywhere, and also time-wise as well.
That would be really convenient for you, Mary.
No, that's so funny. I was going to say the same thing because every day I wake up and I wish I had like the ability to control time. Just like pause it because we need a nap, or just like pause it because we're doing some good stuff. But again, that's just like in opposition to the colonial concept of time. But also the teleportation, because like y'all, I live in Oklahoma and everybody else is everywhere. And like pre-COVID, you know, we ain't trying to do all that for the climate. And then now during COVID, we definitely ain't trying to do all that. So just moving forward, I think that'd be great.
Mine would be like giving people, like, if I could like take my hair down and people are having like a really terrible day because of COVID, because of racism, because of all these things, you know, this is so tragic. If I could just like let my hair down and like shake it in front of people and like grant everyone their wishes. And
But it
they're,
has to
like,
involve your hair.
radically sick, but with their hair.
The specificity of the hair.
I don't know.
No, I think that's real. I think that would be your superpower. Asa, what are you thinking about?
I don't know. I think I've been watching like a lot of like the Avatar series, the last Airbender series.
Same.
I like the idea of maybe being able to like control like an element, like maybe like Earth, or you know, something cool like that.
I agree. I was gonna refer to Avatar, but I didn't know if anybody would get it. But I want to be, my superpower would be healing, like Katara in Avatar does with water. I feel like healing is a really nice superpower, and plus, I like water. I like Avatar too, so I feel like it's a fun elemental thing. And the water tribe is inspired by indigenous communities in Avatar. That's a fun fact.
Yeah.
Tara, did you say something? Oh, you said the teleportation, like Mary Katheryn.
Yeah, no, but I was also thinking, because I don't know Avatar, but I very much align with like the fire bending, and I don't know if that's called.
Oh! Firebending is colonial.
Wow.
I'm sorry.
I don't know Avatar. I just like fire. Let me like my fire in peace.
It's okay. You didn't know, Tara. You didn't know. I think for me it'd be transformation, but like shape-shifting. But once Ty said the thing about like COVIDing away, like, you know, getting rid of COVID with this like magic hair, I was thinking like, oh my God, like what if shape-shifting in this moment, instead of just being able to become like a bird or stuff, you could also become like a COVID fighting virus. Like if it had like no limits, like what you could transform into. I don't know. That's where my brain went.
I got you.
On the molecular level. Okay. All right. Great. So anyway, this is a great talk. We devolved very rapidly at the end. So really quickly, I think just as a close out, if everyone can just think of some sort of a like short wish or manifestation, thinking about Indigenous superfuturism, thinking about imagining forward, thinking about like what we're connected to and where we're going, and knowing that you know, like even if the theaters don't come back for a long time, like we're all storytellers in different capacities. I've seen the Dragonflies Asa is making. I'm waiting for the Dragonfly show. But you know, like if they exist on their own, that's also valid. But that we can all make things in different ways. Mary Katheryn is fighting in the courts right now very aggressively. So what are the, beyond sort of like the definition of colonial theater as an institution, right? Like what are, yes, Tara, according to the comments, will reclaim firebending for us. What are sort of the things that are on your mind and heart right now in terms of like what you wish just for going forward in this moment? And it can just be like short.
Just to be within community.
One thing I've been thinking a lot about was me just realizing that like the beginning of my artistic journey was very much like born out of solitude, and then I end up in a career where it's like dealing with, you know, a lot of different people, personalities, and just creating this big crazy theater family. And now it's like I've come back to the start of it. So I don't know. I feel like there's some sort of meditation in there somewhere that I'm still trying to figure out, but yeah.
Yeah, it has been an interesting moment for sure.
Yeah, mine is to form relations you know, across tribal nations and with people, and to support as many Native artists as I possibly can, and people of color, even thinking about the future, right? Like in racial lines about like Black Lives Matter, and folks are people as well, right? Like folks identifying more than one thing, being complex individuals. So I'm really looking forward to forming relations with, you know, all our people, so that we can come together in that great hoop, or that great circle of life, like our ancestors intended us to do.
I think moving forward, my wish is to see, especially with people my age, like how can we engage anti-racist work and abolitionist work with art and the art communities that we call home. So again, shifting the audience, and how can we heal on the path towards change in our communities, and how we can also build solidarity through art in times like this. I think what's really been helping me is seeing art by Black and Black Indigenous women, and having that flood my feed. It gives me so much hope to working towards that futurity that is not settler futurity. So my wish is to continue to sit back and see this art, but also engage with it and elevate it.
I've been thinking a lot about grounding, I think, during this time, because something weird that I hadn't realized was like a side effect of all the time alone was, I think previously in my practice, there was a lot of self-consciousness. There was a lot of like awareness of other people watching me when I was creating work. But by the very nature of having to like be in space without being watched for, you know, a few months, suddenly in the last few weeks, I had to actually go back to a little bit of in-person work, and I noticed it was gone. Like I was just so grateful to be in community and focused and like ready to lift folks up in a way that I felt like I hadn't been in a while, because of the time that we had, or some of us had, I won't say all of us had, the time that I had to actually like ground in place, and not worry so much about the noise, that I feel like makes me optimistic, like moving forward, about how I focus more on like grounding and lifting folks up, without worrying about, there's just so much noise. I feel like there's just so much colonial noise, and it can be ignored.
Sage against the machine, Maddie.
Sage against the machine.
Bring that sage back.
All right. Any final closing wishes, manifestations, energies?
Well, I can't wait to be in like a rehearsal room with all you.
Oh my God.
Right?
Remember what that was like? Do you remember rehearsal rooms?
Wow. And there was like the table with like the snacks.
Oh my God. Back before, old times. There were snacks. We used to have snacks.
Snacks.
Well, in
cool
honor.
People.
What'd you say? What snacks?
Cool people.
Cool people and snacks.
Cool
well,
people.
in honor of the future time that we will all have snacks together again, maybe in New Haven. Say hi to International Festival of Arts Ideas, folks. Thank you guys so much for being here and for chatting with me. I feel like this gave me so much hope, energy, and peace just getting to share space with you, even though it was remotely. So thank you guys all for being here, and thank you to Arts and Ideas for bringing us together for this conversation.
Signing off.
Yeah, I don't know how this part. Well, there it goes.
Hi, everyone. The sun has set in my apartment while we were talking. Jason, welcome back.
Thank you.
I just wanted to end with great gratitude for this amazing panel. I'm feeling rich and dynamic hope, and I'm going to go sit and think about 7 generations ahead, I think. And Jason, do you have any closing words for us? I know our intention was to have you open, but instead we're going to have you close.
Yeah, I'm very happy to be out of the echo chamber. Jason Mancini, and I'm the executive director of Connecticut Humanities, and we are a state partner for the National Endowment for the Humanities. And we work to support and strengthen humanities organizations across Connecticut through our grants, our digital initiatives, capacity building, and advocacy. So we're really proud to partner with the International Festival of Arts and Ideas, in particular because they share our passion to engage the public in important and timely dialogue that matters to our citizens. It provides opportunities to learn about one another and to seek understanding of our different histories, cultures, and perspectives. I really enjoyed the panel, and I love seeing familiar names and faces in the discourse and in the comments section. So I hope everybody enjoyed the conversation, and I'll look forward to future conversations. And thank you to everybody at Arts and Ideas for hosting this, and to the participants in the panel.
Thank you, Jason, and everyone who's watching. We have a survey. Just let us know what you're thinking. We always want to hear from you as we can continue to create together. It's artidea.org/survey. Have a wonderful night.